On Christmas morning, everyone got gifts with handwritten notes, except me. When I asked why, my mom said, "Because you've given us nothing this year, not even respect." I just nodded, went upstairs, and came back down with a box they forgot existed. When they opened it, my sister gasped, my mom turned pale, and my mom whispered, "You didn't really keep that, did you?" I, 24M, woke up Christmas morning to the sound of wrapping paper rustling downstairs. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted up to my room, and for a moment, I felt that old childhood excitement. This was my first Christmas back home after graduating college and starting my first job 3 months ago. I'd moved back in temporarily while saving for my own place, contributing to groceries and helping with household expenses. Mom had seemed happy to have me around again, or so I thought. Dad was traveling for work as usual, so it was just Mom, my sister, and me. Walking into the living room, I saw the tree surrounded by neatly wrapped presents. Mom was already in her robe, coffee in hand, while my sister sat cross-legged on the floor. Everyone seemed to be waiting for me to start the gift exchange. My sister went first, unwrapping a beautiful jewelry set with a handwritten note from Mom about how proud she was of her college achievements. Mom opened her gift from my sister next, revealing a silk scarf with another heartfelt note about gratitude and love. Then Mom opened what appeared to be a gift from Dad, though he wasn't here, a spa day package with a note about her deserving relaxation. I waited for my turn, scanning the remaining presents under the tree. There were still several wrapped boxes, but as each person continued opening gifts, I realized none had my name on them. My sister unwrapped clothes, books, and gift cards, each accompanied by thoughtful handwritten notes. Mom received flowers, chocolates, and a new purse, all with personal messages. The pile dwindled until only decorative boxes remained under the tree, the kind Mom used for display. I sat there watching, my stomach sinking as the reality hit me. There was nothing for me, not a single package with my name. My sister finished with her last gift, a laptop for her final semester, and looked around expectantly. Mom gathered up the wrapping paper, humming Christmas carols. Neither seemed to notice that I hadn't opened anything. Finally, I had to ask. I cleared my throat and mentioned that I didn't see any gifts with my name. The room went quiet for a moment. Mom stopped cleaning up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She said that I hadn't received any gifts because I hadn't given them anything this year, not even respect. Her words hit like a physical blow. She explained that I'd been ungrateful, that I took their hospitality for granted, and that I never showed appreciation for anything they did. My sister nodded in agreement, adding that I'd been difficult to live with since moving back home. She said I was moody and distant, always on my phone or computer, never engaging with the family anymore. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and anger. These accusations felt completely unfair. I'd been working long hours at my new job, trying to establish myself professionally. When I came home tired, I wasn't being antisocial. I was exhausted. I'd been contributing money for groceries and utilities without being asked. I'd helped with yard work and household repairs. But looking at their faces, I realized they saw something different. They saw someone who came and went without much conversation, who ate dinner quickly and retreated to his room, who didn't participate in family movie nights because I was usually working on projects or job applications for better positions. I just nodded. There was no point in defending myself when their minds were made up. The hurt was too deep for explanations. I told them I understood and went upstairs to my room. Sitting on my bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had just happened. My own family had deliberately excluded me from Christmas because they felt I didn't deserve their love or consideration. The financial contributions, the help around the house, the respectful way I'd tried to live under their roof again, none of it mattered. Then I remembered something. I walked to my closet and pushed aside some old clothes, reaching for a shoebox I'd hidden in the back corner. Inside was something I'd been saving for the right moment, something I'd almost forgotten about. It was a collection of documents, photos, and records I discovered while helping Mom organize the garage last summer. She'd asked me to sort through old boxes and throw away anything unnecessary. That's when I found it. Evidence of something that happened 15 years ago, something that changed our family forever, though I'd been too young to understand it at the time. When I was 9, Dad had gotten into some serious financial trouble. Bad investments, gambling debts, and poor business decisions had left our family on the brink of losing everything. We almost lost the house. I remembered that year being different, fewer Christmas presents, cheaper food, Mom working extra shifts as a nurse. What I discovered in those garage boxes was the truth about how we'd survived that crisis. Mom had been hiding money for years in a secret account, skimming small amounts from her paychecks and hiding cash around the house. When Dad's situation became desperate, she'd had to make a choice. The documents showed that Mom had taken Dad's mother's jewelry, family heirlooms worth tens of thousands of dollars that were supposed to be passed down to future generations. She'd sold everything. The diamond necklace that belonged to great-grandmother, the pearl earrings, the gold bracelets, even the engagement ring that had been in Dad's family for 3 generations. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what she'd told everyone. When Dad's mother asked about the missing jewelry the following Christmas, Mom had blamed me. She told the whole family that 9-year-old me had been playing with the jewelry box and had somehow lost or broken everything. She said I was too ashamed to admit it. I remembered that Christmas differently now. I remembered Dad's mother crying, remembered being scolded for something I didn't understand, remembered the cold treatment from Dad's side of the family for years afterward. They thought I'd destroyed irreplaceable family treasures through childish recklessness. Dad never learned the truth. His mother died 5 years later, still believing her grandson had destroyed her precious heirlooms through carelessness. Dad's siblings still treated me differently at family gatherings, and I'd never understood why until I found those documents. The papers showed everything: the pawn shop receipts, the bank deposits, even a handwritten note from Mom to herself about letting me take the blame to protect her marriage. She'd sacrificed my relationship with Dad's entire side of the family to cover up her own actions. I'd kept this secret for months, not knowing what to do with the information. Part of me understood why she'd done it. We needed the money to survive. But the part of me that had endured years of cold treatment from relatives, the part that had grown up thinking I was the family disappointment, that part wanted justice. Looking at those documents now, after being excluded from Christmas morning, I made my decision. I put everything back in the shoebox and carried it downstairs. Mom and my sister were in the kitchen making breakfast, chatting happily about their new gifts. The living room still smelled like pine and cinnamon, but the warmth had gone out of the day for me. I announced that I had something for them after all. I set the box on the coffee table and said it was a gift that had been waiting 15 years to be opened. My sister approached first, curious about what I might have been hiding. Mom followed more slowly, something in my tone making her cautious. I told them to open it together. My sister lifted the lid and immediately saw the pawn shop receipts on top. She picked one up, reading the description of diamond necklace, pearl earrings, gold bracelet. The dates were all from December 15 years ago. Her face showed confusion at first, then understanding as she read more. Mom's face had gone completely white. She was staring at the box like it contained a snake. My sister found the handwritten note next, the one where Mom had detailed her plan to blame me for the missing jewelry. She read it aloud, her voice getting quieter with each word. Then she found the bank deposit slips showing how the money from selling the jewelry had saved our house. The silence stretched on for several minutes. My sister kept looking between the documents and Mom, trying to process what she was learning. Mom just stood there, frozen. Finally, Mom whispered the question about whether I'd really kept all of this evidence. Her voice was barely audible. I told her I'd found it while cleaning the garage like she'd asked. I explained that I'd been 9 years old when she decided to destroy my relationship with Dad's family to protect herself. I'd spent 15 years being treated like the family screw-up by my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, all because she needed someone to blame. My sister was staring at Mom now, understanding dawning on her face. She remembered how differently Dad's family treated me at gatherings, how they'd whisper about me being careless and destructive. She'd never known why. I continued, telling them how I'd discovered that grandmother had died, still believing I'd destroyed her most precious possessions. How Dad's brothers and sisters still mentioned it sometimes, shaking their heads about how some children just don't understand the value of family heirlooms. Mom finally found her voice and tried to explain. She said she'd been desperate, that we would have lost everything, that she'd planned to tell the truth eventually, but never found the right moment. The years had passed, and it became harder and harder to admit what she'd done. But I wasn't interested in her explanations anymore. I told her that this morning she'd said I'd given them nothing but disrespect this year. I said that was interesting, considering I'd given her 15 years of taking the blame for something I didn't do. I'd given her 15 years of being the family disappointment so she could look like the innocent victim of her child's carelessness. My sister was crying now, understanding how much this had affected my relationship with our extended family. She remembered birthday parties and holidays where I'd been treated differently, always assumed to be the problem child. I told them both that I'd been planning to keep this secret forever. Despite everything, I hadn't wanted to destroy their image of mom or create problems in the family. But after being excluded from Christmas morning for supposedly showing no respect or gratitude, I'd realized that my consideration had never been reciprocated. Mom tried to apologize, saying she'd been young and scared and had made a terrible mistake. She said she'd never meant for it to go on so long, that she'd tried to make it up to me in other ways over the years. I asked her what ways those had been. I reminded her of every family gathering where I'd sat quietly while relatives made comments about my childhood destructiveness. I reminded her of every time Dad had mentioned his mother's disappointment about the lost jewelry. I asked her if she'd ever once stepped forward to correct the record. The room was completely quiet except for my sister's sniffling. Mom had no answer because there was no answer. She'd let me carry that blame for 15 years to protect herself. I told them I was moving out immediately. I'd been saving money for my own place anyway, and I had enough for a security deposit and first month's rent. I couldn't continue living with people who thought so little of me that they'd exclude me from Christmas morning, especially when they'd been benefiting from my silence about their own secrets for years. My sister tried to intervene, saying we could work through this as a family. She suggested that maybe we all needed to have an honest conversation and figure out how to move forward. But I was done with family conversations. I'd spent too many years being the problem that needed to be managed or fixed. I told her she was welcome to have all the honest conversations she wanted with Mom, but I was removing myself from the equation. I went upstairs and started packing my essential items. I could hear them talking in hushed voices downstairs, probably trying to figure out how to handle this situation. I didn't care anymore. Within 2 hours, I'd loaded my car with everything I absolutely needed and found an extended stay hotel that had availability. I left a note saying I'd be back for the rest of my belongings over the next few days, and that they shouldn't try to contact me until I was ready. As I drove away from the house, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't carrying someone else's secret. I wasn't protecting someone who'd never protected me. I wasn't being grateful for the privilege of being treated poorly by my own family. Update 1. 3 days later, Dad called me. He'd come home from his business trip to find Mom in tears and my sister trying to explain what had happened. Mom had finally told him the truth about his mother's jewelry. Dad was devastated. He'd spent 15 years believing his son had carelessly destroyed irreplaceable family heirlooms. He'd watched his mother cry over those lost pieces and had felt embarrassed every time relatives brought up the incident. Now he was learning that his wife had sold his mother's jewelry to save their house and had allowed their young son to take the blame. He couldn't understand how she'd let it go on for so long. Through his mother's funeral, through years of family gatherings where I was treated differently. He asked to meet me for dinner, and I agreed. We sat in a restaurant neither of us had been to before, neutral territory where we could talk without the weight of the house and its memories. Dad apologized for every cold comment from his relatives, for every time he'd felt disappointed in me over the jewelry incident, for not questioning the story more thoroughly at the time. He said he should have known that a 9-year-old wouldn't have been able to access the jewelry box without help, and he should have investigated more carefully. But his apology felt hollow somehow. Not because he wasn't sincere, but because the damage was already done. I'd grown up feeling like a disappointment to my father's side of the family. I'd developed a sense of being inherently careless and destructive. These weren't things that could be fixed with an apology, even a heartfelt one. I told Dad that I appreciated him reaching out, but that I needed time to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with the family going forward. Too much had been broken for too long. He understood, or said he did. He mentioned that he and Mom were having their own serious conversations about trust and honesty in their marriage. Apparently, learning that your wife let your child take the blame for her decisions for 15 years creates some significant marital problems. Update 2. A week later, my sister showed up at my hotel. She'd tracked me down through my work address and wanted to talk. I let her in, curious about what she might have to say. She told me that the house had been tense since I left. Mom barely came out of her room, Dad was sleeping in the guest bedroom, and everyone was walking on eggshells. She said it felt like the family was falling apart. I told her that maybe it should fall apart. Maybe a family built on lies and scapegoating wasn't worth preserving. She got angry at that, saying I was being dramatic and that every family had problems. She said Mom had made a mistake, but that it was 15 years ago, and holding on to anger for that long wasn't healthy. I asked her to imagine how she would feel if she discovered that she'd been deliberately blamed for something she didn't do, and that the person who really did it had watched her suffer consequences for 15 years without speaking up. I asked her to imagine how it would feel to learn this on the same day that person excluded her from Christmas for being ungrateful. She couldn't answer that question. I told her that I wasn't trying to destroy the family, but that I also wasn't going to continue pretending everything was fine just to keep everyone else comfortable. I'd done enough of that for one lifetime. She left without resolving anything, but I could see that she was starting to understand the magnitude of what had happened. It wasn't just about stolen jewelry or family secrets. It was about a child being sacrificed to protect an adult's reputation, and that child growing up to become an adult who was still being treated as the family problem. Update 3. 2 weeks after Christmas, I signed a lease on a small apartment across town. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and for the first time since moving back home, I felt like I could breathe freely. Mom tried calling several times, but I wasn't ready to talk to her yet. Dad sent thoughtful text messages occasionally, updating me on practical matters and letting me know he was there when I was ready. My sister alternated between angry messages about me tearing the family apart and apologetic messages about not understanding the situation better. I focused on work and setting up my new place. I bought my own furniture, decorated the walls with things I liked, and established routines that belonged only to me. It was surprising how quickly I felt better once I wasn't constantly managing other people's emotions and expectations. One evening, I was organizing some boxes when I found a Christmas card that had been forwarded from my parents' house. It was from Dad's sister, my aunt. Inside was a note apologizing for how I'd been treated over the years regarding the jewelry incident. Apparently, Dad had told his siblings the truth about what really happened. She wrote that she'd always felt bad about how the family had treated me, but that she'd believed Mom's story and thought I was just too ashamed to discuss it. She said she hoped I could forgive them for their coldness, and that she'd like to rebuild our relationship based on the truth instead of lies. It was the first piece of genuine accountability I'd received from anyone in the family besides Dad. It made me realize that there might be relationships worth salvaging, even if the family structure as a whole needed to change. I decided to call her back. We had a long conversation about what had really happened, how it had affected me, and what kind of relationship we might be able to have going forward. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start. Over the following months, I slowly began rebuilding connections with Dad's side of the family. Not everyone was ready to acknowledge how poorly they'd treated me, but several relatives made genuine efforts to apologize and start over. As for Mom, that relationship remained complicated. She eventually wrote me a long letter taking full responsibility for what she'd done and acknowledging the lasting damage it had caused. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize the impact. It was the first time she'd truly owned her actions without deflecting. But trust, once broken so completely, doesn't rebuild quickly. We began having occasional coffee meetings, supervised visits where we could talk without the pressure of pretending everything was normal. It was awkward and painful, but it was honest in a way our relationship had never been before. That Christmas morning had revealed something that went far deeper than missing presents or hurt feelings. It had exposed 15 years of scapegoating, secrets, and misplaced blame. The family I thought I knew had been built on a foundation of lies, with my reputation as the sacrifice that kept the structure stable. Walking away from that dynamic was the best gift I could have given myself. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't carrying someone else's shame or managing someone else's image. I was just myself, flawed and human, but finally free to define my own worth instead of accepting someone else's assessment of my value. The box I'd brought downstairs that Christmas morning hadn't just contained old documents. It had contained the truth about who I really was versus who I'd been told I was. Opening it had been painful for everyone, but it had also been necessary. Some gifts are meant to disrupt rather than comfort, and sometimes disruption is exactly what a family needs to find its way back to something real.